Hello and welcome to the Center for Medical Justice. This is Dr. Joseph Parker, and today I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Neil Anand. Now, I consider Dr. Anand a bit of a savant when it comes to data analytics and science in general. I'm a medical doctor with degrees in science, but there are things that he understands at a level that I do not, and I want you to benefit from what he knows. He's probably too humble to say those things, but I'll say them for him. Dr. Anand, would you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks for that very nice introduction. And I I'm glad we became friends because one of the things that I really liked about you when I first talked with you and we first met was our some of our scientific gurus who influenced our thinking and people who influence the way we think and how we perceive the world and our understanding of the world. And we were talking about Freeman Dyson, who was a great mathematician and physicist, and that you read his book, and then I read his book. And I had never met anyone who actually had read Freeman Dyson's book, and because I thought he was a great human being and a great thinker, a visionary thinker. So. And I hope to, during this interview, talk about some of the scientific gurus, because in science, many, even the best and the greatest, Newton, I stand on the shoulders of giants. So I will try to explain, because I've heard some of your wonderful other interviews and I watched some of your interviews before I came here. That people have become disconnected with the technology and the science and the ideas and it's becoming more and more like magic, because as things become more complicated, it's very difficult for a person to understand some of these things. And I would also like to convey science as an art during this process, and go into those topics, hopefully, as time goes on. But one of the things that, I think when we were talking about our love of scientific gurus and the way they perceive the world is how basically human beings' thoughts and mind is formed by the books they read, the experiences they have, how they perceive the world. We perceive the world through our five senses. And our thoughts are often formed, and our mind is formed by our experiences. So that's how a mind thinks, and that's how a human being thinks, from our experiences and the books we read, and the thoughts and ideas of other people. So that's, something I always found very interesting. And a lot of times, Joseph, I bet you if I went into your house and walked through your house and looked through your library, I would understand, for the most part, how you think, or some of the ideas of what you think, just by the books you've read and your ideas that you've read, especially if I've read some of the same books, and it helps me communicate with people, especially when I know their ideas and their thoughts. So
I would have to agree, and I think that the books we read, especially the great books and great works, and by great works I mean those that have influence. There are some science fiction movies and novels that have had a bigger societal influence than incredible, tomes written by well-meaning philosophers who didn't quite touch the human experience as well as some of these authors did. And I think it helps kind of keep us informed about ourselves and gives us sort of a cultural touchstone where we can all come together and say, we all agree, we all understand. It can be a book like All Quiet on the Western Front, 1984. Any of those things, A World Set Free, all those things come together, Sagan, and now, we've got Neil deGrasse Tyson.
absolutely.
Those guys speak to me. As a child, it was Sagan, now it's Tyson, but
Right.
they paint a picture of an understanding that I hope to strive for. A humanistic understanding of the world where science is used to better our position in the universe and to help us understand each other and ourselves better so that we can live in a better society in the end. Now, which authors had a big influence on you?
I mean, there's numerous authors. I mean, I used to read a lot of science fiction as a kid, and but you know, back then, I say it's changed over time. And you know what? If I can explain over time, these scientific gurus who influenced my mind through a chronological version, that might be a little bit better. So I started from, when I was a kid to I could go through that, so and then kind of connect the dots if that makes it a little easier for you. But
Sure.
when I was a kid, I can starting there. I was born in Media, Pennsylvania, but I really grew up in the New England area in upstate New York, and that area is like a extremely it's a very interesting culture there. It's a very localized culture, and I've seen New England culture is different than Texas culture, which is different than California culture, which is different than Florida culture. Everywhere you live in America, even when I lived in West Virginia, they have microcosms of culture, and the culture is different in America. So even though we're a melting pot of people, and you have different people with different cultures and microcultures, and it just America is very different than many parts of the world that I've traveled to, especially since it has many localized cultures and different cultures, but also they have many different people with totally different ideas. But up there, what I loved about the place was a lot of American Indian, a lot of Native American history was there. And I thought their culture was amazing. So when I was in elementary school, to me, what was great was they had Indian War Party come in. American Indian War Party when I was in school. I went to public school up there, and that was, one of my best experiences as an elementary school kid, and learning about all their cultures, because Schenectady, there's names like Schenectady, Niskuna up there, Mohawk River. And so they're all American Indian names, but there are not very many American Indians left.
Right.
But their culture is fascinating, and that was one of my best experiences as a kid. And my parents emigrated here from India, both of them. My dad was he was a mechanical engineer, and my mother was a biologist. And my dad had a PhD in mechanical engineering. It was actually, we went into rocket science. That was another reason that you and I believe, connected very easily, because of he was in rocket science, and he was a great rocket scientist, and he was into turbines and turbine machinery. And my mother did a lot of biology research. And when I was actually a kid, she used to take me to the lab all the time, and I would learn how to do polyacrylamide gels and northern blot analysis and southern blot. And so that whole molecular biology, because she was into the research, I learned as a kid. So that's where my scientific idea, because I was wondering, why are they doing things the way they're doing? And scientists do things in a very particular manner.
Right.
And the scientific method, and what's the process of scientific method. So all those ideas were inculcated to me as a child. But frankly, when I was a kid, I liked, recess the best, like any other kid. Art was my favorite. I loved Dennis the Menace as a kid, watching that with my grandpa. So, which he didn't like, because, he was from England, and he went to Cambridge, and he trained in Cambridge, and, he didn't understand that American free-spirited mentality, the rebel culture.
That's right.
America,
That's right.
huh?
Yeah, the British
Benjamin
frown on that.
Franklin. Huh?
The British frown on that.
Yeah, the British
The
frown
French
on
are a
that.
little more understanding, but the British don't like it.
So, that he didn't have that Benjamin Franklin ideology, and he's like, "Why do you like this Dennis the Menace kid?" But as a kid,
Sure.
I had a very similar. I used to go in the forest. Stuff that you wouldn't do today, that a parent probably wouldn't let you do today. I used to walk uh, to school and from school, not because not like my grandfather's time. Oh, I don't, because it was fun. It was like what Dennis the Menace would do. I used to walk across creeks and little bridges and stuff like that. Um, it was kind of a different. We never locked our doors.
The weird thing is, it is safer now than it was then.
Oh yeah,
Perception is that it's more dangerous now because we hear about everything now the minute it happens. Back then, if it
right,
didn't happen next door, you didn't know.
right.
We blithely went through life. They would send us out in the morning and say, come back when you're hungry or at sundown.
Oh
Right?
yeah, yeah.
We'd be out riding horses and throwing rocks at each
Right,
other, come back with big knots on our head. That was just farm life back then.
right. Oh no, and the freedom of range, But I know there was a freedom back then because I doubt very much many kids would. I mean, many parents would let their kids
You wouldn't be allowed to.
let you
If
go
a kid was
two
found out
miles.
in the woods by themselves 2 miles,
Yeah, I used to hike in the
you're
woods
going to jail.
at night,
You're going to jail. We rode
and
on
every
the
kid
top,
did that.
absolutely. We rode on the top of our station wagon on the way
Right.
down to the river to swim. A lady had opened the trunk up and laid the seats down so her kids could sleep, and she opened the trunk to let them out. She went to jail. She went to jail. Cops waved at us. They'd see us go by on top of the station wagon, go, "Hey, there they go." It was the old days. It was very different.
Right. So, talking about those days to me is just very interesting. And I remember one thing people used to say was, it's a free country. That was a common vernacular back then when I was a kid growing up, and you don't hear it that often now. And I think that is a travesty. And it's a change in American culture, like I said, from the Dennis Menace, Bart Simpson, right? The Steve McQueen, Clint Eastwood. That's our art. That's what we export to the world. These are our American heroes. And so, to me, that is a very important part of our culture and how it's changed, but things constantly change all the time. And, medicine's been changing, and hopefully we can talk about all these topics. Hopefully,
Heraclitus said that the only constant is change, and I think he was right about that.
yes. And, believe it or not, I actually went to Ephesus one time in Turkey.
Wow.
And walking around those were my thoughts because he was brilliant, and he said, a man, never steps into the same river twice because the river is constantly changing, and then the man is also different because the man is constantly changing. So everything is constantly changing, and Dr. John Locke, who's one of our greatest physicians of all time, physician minds of all time. He also echoed that, saying that everything's in a constant state of flux, that it's hard to make predictions and find the underlying order of things.
Right.
And that the human mind is a tabula rasa, and just like what we talked about in the very beginning of our conversation, that what you think and how you think is based on your perceptions and what you experience throughout your life.
The brain's an interesting device, and until we had neural nets, there really wasn't anything similar. It is, most machines don't alter themselves to be amenable to further processing, and most programs cannot alter the machine on which they run, but the brain is a unique analog system that every thought you have changes the structure of the very device that created that thought. Every time we pull a memory out and then stop thinking about it, we resave it with new connotations. And that's how they do their exposure therapy and recall therapy, where they will have someone with PTSD recall a memory and then give them a little bit of beta blocker, a little bit of Versed or something, so that they're mellow and relaxed, and let them talk about what happened. That memory gets resaved with less of an emotional impact than it was originally saved with, and this can help treat PTSD. So yeah, the human mind's an amazingly complex system. Now you've studied different systems, and what what got you interested in computers and programming and stuff like that?
All right, that's a great question. I appreciate that. Well, one of the great things about America at the time, and like I was a first generation immigrant, so my parents, we'd go to library a lot, the American library, which to me, I growing up and going to the library, I think that's one of the greatest American innovations, is that you have a public center of learning that was completely free. And, back then, my mom used to drop us off there and we used to run around the library. And, it was, it was the early form, I would say, of babysitting. And I took, there was this teacher there, Kathy Handy, and you only remember a few teachers in your life that really impact you. Most of the names I've forgotten. But she taught us on the Commodore 64 programming. And I don't know if you remember how
My first computer, my
the
first
technology that is, but
the first computer I owned was a Commodore 64. So
right. So
back
okay, so you love this. All right. So you owned a Commodore 64. So I, programmed on a Commodore 64, and my first computer was an Apple II computer, and I used to program it, and I used to make sometimes my own circuits. Back then, I made my own clapper, and with the diodes and the resistors, and you'd get a kit, and then you'd make it, and you'd try to learn about it and how to make an integrated circuit, like Robert Noyce, a Texas Instrument, who made the first integrated circuit. So,
right.
But basically, I learned there, and I was getting really into computers. My first job was at CompUSA. So, I've always loved computers. I went to college at a computer college, but we were talking about the human mind, and one great thing about the library system, and going back to the American gurus, for me and other gurus, at that library, they had a big movie section. So, and I could get anything I wanted. My mom never checked. She never watched. She never bothered. She never, and I watched a lot of Jacob Bernowski. I don't know if you knew who that is. He did The Ascent of Man, so I watched his whole series. Kenneth Clark and his Civilization series, Carl Sagan and his Cosmos series. So growing up, watching many of them, and then I'd read their books, and they were brilliant minds, and that's how I, appreciated art and film and science. And I also, back then at the libraries, you could rent A Clockwork Orange and watch it. And as a kid, and I don't even think the librarian knew what it was. And you'd be watching all these, because Stanley Kubrick was, they were probably, I was with my mom, and they didn't even check you grab a couple of movies and take them home and let's go. And so
they knew there was going to be nothing X-rated. Everything else,
But Stanley Kubrick was like banned in England. So
yeah, of course, everything's banned in England at first, though. That's just that's their nature. It's like the British say that Americans always make the right decision once they've exhausted all other possibilities. The British ban everything until it becomes so popular in America that they're like, okay.
Well, so I was into computers. Then I went into Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and that I went to college there, and that was like a monastery of science. If you think of a monastery of science, it's similar to MIT, Caltech, and whatnot, but it's it was 90% men, I think, 10% female when I was there. So it was kind of like a monastery, and
Right.
you know, a lot of science there. You know, when I was in high school, actually, before I went to college there, um, I used to make chemicals. So we used to take cholesterol, okay, and you know, make it in the flasks with the reaction, make your drug, put it in a flash column, purify it, test it within liquid chromatography, make sure you got the right substance, and then put it in the nuclear magnetic resonance to make sure you got the right product. So I mean,
Right.
that was the kind of level of chemistry that was being done there was so advanced, where you could making your own drugs. You could make anything there, and so learning that, and you know, I did polymerase chain reaction all throughout college. I was doing research there, but you know, I loved computers and was a computer school, and all the everything was computer technology, computer. Um, I mean, there were some of the people there who were physics people who wanted to make nuclear weapons or nuclear factory, you know, nuclear, you know, anything nuclear, you know, nuclear submarines, you know. So there was a lot of nuclear guys in my physics class. Um, and the math, you know, like I said, Jacob Bernowski was one of my heroes growing up, and so I wanted to be good in math, but I, you know, transfinite mathematics. I mean, Cantor,
You're talking about
Godel.
real math, not the
I
math
mean, yeah,
that I excelled at, which was I did fine in school in math, but when you get to those things, I get lost on matrix equations. I mean, some of this is it really
right.
does take a special type of mind and imagination to see the math, to do the equations is like driving a car, right? Most of us can drive a car, few of us could build one. Hardly any human being alive today could build one from the ground up and understand how all that technology comes together in a modern automobile. The same can be said for mathematics. There's math, there's daily math, there's academic math, and then there's almost a spiritual level of mathematics where you're
Oh,
comprehending
absolutely.
things that relate to the structure of the universe and all these things that are extremely, you know, ephemeral. But yeah, my favorite is Dirac when he's doing his math equation. He said, "Hey, look, we're getting a square root. That looks like there's a negative and positive form of matter. Well, let's go look for the antimatter." And he discovers it. The math said it was there, and it's there. That you know they can find these things. So math is a lot more powerful than I think most people give it credit for. And when some of the mathematical equations say that we live in a multi, you know, there are more than three or four if you count time dimensions. I
Right.
take that seriously because you know they've been proven pretty accurate in the
I
past.
I know. I mean, I agree with you. It's spiritual. When I was there, I mean, you'd meet mathematicians that were just otherworldly. I mean, and so yeah, they were spiritual. I would say that that kind of level of mathematics. Um, you know, but you know, mathematics can be very artistic. Like I've been to Alhambra in Spain or MC Escher, and that kind of mathematics and that
Yeah.
symmetry and Euclidean symmetry is beautiful. But you know, I reached a certain level of math, but you know, Srinivasa Ramanujan, it was just, I mean, yeah, if I dedicated your whole life to it, maybe you could reach that level, but to invent math at that level, you know, Hardy Weinberg is great, you know, Price, you know, Hamilton, ecology, mathematics, Nash. Okay, you can kind of
Yeah.
get to that level, but Ramanujan and some of these people are, I mean, Cantor,
Well, one of the things that blew my
infinity
mind,
mathematics is just, it's complicated.
yeah,
And
one of the things that blew my mind was learning about the Mayans. And I'm learning about the Mayans in school. And they're like, yeah, they had this calendar that went out 40 some odd thousand years. And it was more accurate than the ones we use today. And they had the tune and the Baktun, and the Baktun was, I'm like, these people are calculating in tens of thousands of years accurately, predicting, you know, the precession of the equinoxes and the all these things that we most Americans don't really, most people in the world don't understand today because we don't, it's not as crucial to our daily life as it used to be. But these guys did it without computers. They did it without,
oh yeah, I've been to Chichen Itza and I've seen their observatory in Chichen Itza, and I went to Uxmal where they have curved, you know, curved surfaces. I made out of stone, which is, hard to do back then with that
Right.
technology. At Uxmal, you can see that Mayan culture. So it was advanced. They never developed the arch, though, and that held it back in terms of artistically. If they had developed, because we had Western civilization, in terms of Western civilization, had the arch. They were able to develop cathedrals and, you know, uh,
Aqueducts, bridges, there's
right,
lots of things that are the arch really comes in handy. There are, I mean, even when
right,
you're building a dam, it's a reverse arch to hold back water effectively.
right.
So
So, I mean, their art and their structures and their architecture was limited, based on their math and architecture at the time, and
they still did
but
amazing things, though. Amazing things.
But I mean, that's one thing about being a doctor is I say, hey, the first doctor, Imhotep, was also the first great artist, which was he made the pyramids. So he inventor of the pyramids, was also the first physician. So, and he was one of the great polymaths, polyminds of humanity. And to me, that's interesting. I've always wanted to go there. Have you ever gone there?
No, I have not. My entire life has been dedicated to work since I was about 10 years old. I've made sure my children had the education that travel provides, but for the most part, I myself have not been to nearly as many places as I should have. I've been to the Amazon, but that again, that was I was practicing medicine in the Amazon, learning and practicing medicine, and I've only been to a few places outside of the United States. I've been to Canada a few times. I've been to Mexico once or twice. I've been to some of the Caribbean countries and then to South America. That's about it. I've never seen Europe. I've never seen Asia, which are things that I
Look, I've
truly
been to Europe, I've been to Asia.
feel like I have to do.
Um, yeah, I mean, they're interesting countries. Like I said, you go around the world and I've been to many countries around the world, Russia to Japan to China, New Zealand, and then many of the countries you mentioned, is that every culture is different. Um, and every culture thinks they're the best.
That's true. That's human nature. Now, all the places
Right.
you've seen, which one impressed you the most with a blend of, say, artistic, architectural, and mathematical beauty? Which place made the biggest impression on you?
I think I would have to say most recently when I would say Dubai, when I went to Dubai, um, and that to me is very interesting because Islam has produced for most a long time. It's very static culture, but when I went to Dubai, I was just blown away, by how it was like being in a futuristic city,
Right.
almost. And the everything, the architecture was beautiful, but Islamic math and Islamic art has always been beautiful, in
Well,
terms.
it used to be the center of innovation. That's where
Right,
everyone went to have freedom of thought, freedom of expression.
right,
Matter of fact, all of the great works of the Greeks come to us now because the Muslims didn't burn them when the Christian world was burning everything, was going through its cultural revolution and
right,
burning everything old. The Muslims didn't, and Jews used to go to Muslim nations for sanctuary from the Christian
right,
crusaders.
right.
It's now everything's flipped.
Well, like that's what you said, Heraclitus.
Everything changes. That's right.
Everything changes. Everything's constantly changing, and hopefully with anti-entropic forces that things constantly advance, and what Boltzmann's law, right? Everything's constant, and entropy is constantly increasing. So what is good? What are forces of good? Forces of good are anti-entropic forces. Where you got gravity, that's an anti-entropic force. You got life. Life is an
Right.
anti-entropic force. You got technology, and technology, I think, is a anti-entropic force. So you got those three anti-entropic forces. So I think those are interesting. And you know,
When it comes
affect.
to technology, who was your inspiration? Who were your gurus when it comes to technology?
I would say technologically, in my opinion, I'd say there are three of them. Like I said, I went to RPI, so I'd bring back then at RPI. That's when I'd say computers really started becoming big, and the personal computer and the internet revolution was just happening at that time. And so Ray Kurzweil, I don't know if you've heard of
Oh
technology
yes, yes.
and the
I'm
age of
I'm
spirit
still
communication.
I'm still waiting for the singularity to
Well,
load me.
that was huge back then. In the 1990s, Steve Jobs, obviously, he was a technological guru of America. I
Sure.
mean, he combined art and computers together, and not he was just a great spiritual mind. When he would say, "I'm trying to," why did you make the computer? Well, I wanted to create a bicycle for the human mind.
That's
He
right. He
he
did say
wanted
that.
he said that. And to me, when he said, I want to create a bicycle for the human mind, basically a fast abacus, right? And look at how fast
Oh yeah.
back then, I had Apple II and we're talking about Commodore. And now when you see a computer and what it can do in the computational ability of a computer,
The progress is truly insane
right.
when we look back at that.
I
And
mean, insane. And so I'd say Steve Jobs was there. And then when I was at my early AI teacher at RPI was a gentleman named David Porish, Professor Porish. And like I said, you rarely remember many of your professors. But he was just like a rock star. And he taught, science fiction and art and artificial intelligence back then. And the kind of mind you have to foresee all that. But RPI, that school was always, they had festivals, anime festivals, everything, magic and role-playing games, and that kind of culture is, many people don't experience that kind of culture,
that's true. That's true.
culture.
It's almost sounds almost like the Bushido doctrine, where samurai were not allowed to just study war. They had to do calligraphy,
Oh,
flower arranging, poetry. You had to pick one of those things, and you had to become
right.
adept at it. And I can imagine those guys, okay, I'll paint your picture. But many of them became master poets, master artists. I don't know about the flower arranging because that's ephemeral, but I'm sure they were good at it. But and
I love Japanese culture. I've been there. I've been
yeah,
to Japan, and I went there at the height, the peak. I went there in high school when Japan was supposed to be taking over everything, the whole world, and the before they had their implosion. I went there. I went to Sega Tower. I went to Tokyo. I went to see the giant Buddha, and I walked all around by myself because my dad took me with him, and he said, "Oh, go see the country."
you can do that in Japan. And anybody who finds you will just lead you home.
I did, and so I just loved, and the food was amazing there. I mean, everything was expensive, but I love Japanese culture. But you could see how it's become a little bit static. It's a static culture, and now
Right, right.
China
It's hard.
taking over.
Nations strive to be after World War II, and their old ways had been kind of decimated, and technology had kind of kicked their rears. They kind of dedicated themselves to the understanding of technology and embracing technology, and eventually making better cars and radios and everything than for the most part American companies bothered to, until we got on our game and said we better step it up, or it'll be like British Leyland. And so I admire their ability to do a 180 and say, you know what? Technology stomped our imperial ambitions. This technology must be pretty neat. Let's learn some of it. And they really embraced it. And it's almost a Blade Runner-esque kind of, but once they hit success, and they like America during the 70s and 80s, we tend to become a little stagnant and think that now that we're the greatest. You remember the movie with Sean Connery, where the Japanese had all these secret meeting places in these.
Rising Sun, I think.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, the panic that Japan was going to own everything.
right.
Right.
I mean, I went there and I saw their culture, but you could tell they're a very it's not, they're artistic now, which is, I think I went to Ginza district or Shinjuku district. They have some districts where they have great costume culture and cosplay and that kind of art. But I mean, I think once America dominated them, once America beat them, usually, the dominant culture, once a dominant culture beats a non-dominant culture, the dominant culture reigns supreme until they themselves are taken over. So, that seems to be the history of the world. And you and I were in the military and we were taught that. And that's the importance of being in the military and why the military is important. So, that I think was, a lot of something that we really learned. And,
But they took their cultural dedication to the perfection of an art and applied it to technology, which I really admired. Now, you mentioned about the military, and it's my understanding that you served in the United States military, right? And you
Yes.
after the attacks on 9/11.
Yeah, I was there. So I was doing
Tell me about
I was
that.
doing my internship at NYU Downtown Hospital, which is near Chinatown. It's in the South Street Seaport area, but that was 2 blocks or 3 blocks away from the World Trade Center. And I lived right there. And I was there that day. So when the first plane hit, I was in a lecture where you could see the Twin Towers from that lecture room. And someone, it was, I think, a breast cancer lecture or something like that. And someone said, I saw a helicopter hit the World Trade Center. And one of our professors there said, "Oh, we got to activate the whole hospital system because there are going to be a lot of casualties from that helicopter hitting the thing," because you could see the smoke coming out and they had a bombing there before,
Right.
and so a lot of the doctors there had gone through that first bombing, and so that was the start of the day, and then they activated. And the craziness of that day was so impactful. You never forget that day. And that was a strange day. I mean, I remember seeing the second explosion, because people were looking out and seeing what was happening, and the casualties were slow in coming in. Everything was, on hold. And many casualties started coming in when the Twin Towers fell, but I didn't know they had fallen at the time. People told me the whole city was being bombed, that we were at war and the whole city was bombed and someone had bombed City Hall. And, that was a crazy day. All the things, a lot of people had died, and a lot of crying families, wailing families. So it was a horrific day. I mean, when the Twin Towers fell, and right after that, I remember walking outside of the hospital, because there was dust had come in, so much dust had come in. And then looking through the dust and seeing the Brooklyn Bridge in the distance, and it looked like 1 million people were leaving the city. And because I thought we were at war, and I'm like, oh, I guess we're going to have to leave the city. But, then when casualties started coming in, those thoughts faded away. And then I was dealing with that whole day. And right after that, that whole area, they had no electricity. My whole apartment was destroyed because there was dust. I left my windows open, and the dust had come in there and left thick dust everywhere, destroyed my computer.
Yeah. Toxic dust too. I had a lot of.
Oh yeah, it was all human beings and tons of dust, and it was all everywhere. And then I'd gone to the site and tried to help out there, but that there was no electricity, so it was like living in a bombed out city. It felt like it, because the police had cordoned out that part of the city,
right,
and they, because it was a crime scene, and um, uh, all the Twin Towers and Building 7 fell, and it was such a disaster. So it was like living in a depressed part of the city. And then I remember sometimes leaving that part and going to, I think, above 14th Street at the time, which is Union Square, I think. Then it was like a vibrant city, like nothing had ever happened. Like it
Wow.
was a totally normal, people eating, restaurants and whatever. But then when you go back, you leave, and to cross over, you had to show your medical badge or whatever because they restricted it. Then you're back in, there's no electric, there's, living
Wow.
it was
That
in a
looks like
war
World
zone.
War II London, it looks like
Right.
a fleet of V2s had landed, it was,
Oh, yeah.
that's the only parallel. America has never really experienced war the way other nations do. I mean, Germany was pounded to oblivion. Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five describes it well. London was pummeled, and the people would be singing down in the subway stations. And, Pearl Harbor is the closest we've come. That's, 80 years ago and was thousands of miles off our coast. So 9/11 is probably the closest thing we've come to since 1812, since the burning of the White House. The closest thing we've come to actually having, an attack, to actually being bombed. Now, how did that make you feel? And what was your reaction to the
I
9/11?
mean, it was a traumatic experience. I mean, I saw people die, a lot of people die, a lot of families screaming and wailing. Um, you know, uh, you know, I just joined. I basically wanted to join, and everyone who had suffered through all that had the fervor of being attacked and that camaraderie at the time,
Right,
and
right.
coming together of the American people and the American spirit of going through that trauma. And they invaded Afghanistan, and what happened was I joined, but then by the time you go through the background checks and this and that and whatnot,
It's never
you
as fast as you think it will be. It's not like
get.
World War II.
Well, they backdated. They backdated. Luckily, they backdated to the day you sign your papers or whatever you go in, or I don't know how they do it. But they backdated to I think 3 months until the day of the attack or whatever happened. And some people joined. I thought more people would have joined than had at the time, but a lot of people did.
Yeah,
And
less than 1% of the American population has served in the United States military today. Less than
right.
1%. So now, which branch did you join?
I joined the U.S. Navy Medical Corps at the time, but I had to go to residency, and I left obviously New York. I moved to Philadelphia to do my anesthesia residency, and so at the time when they invaded Iraq, they wanted an anesthesiologist, so I was allowed to finish my training.
Well,
Um,
where did you train, and
and so
what
Thomas
was your
Jefferson.
experience in the military?
Okay, yeah, I would love to explain all that. So I went to Thomas Jefferson University Hospital that did anesthesia. In terms of military experience, most of it was at Walter Reed Hospital, um, or Nashville Oak Grove or whatever I was drilling at, because the way they included the time as the residency and time. But I was at Walter Reed Hospital. At that time, they had invaded Iraq. I think Jessica Lynch had been there a few months
Right.
before. And, at the time when I was there, there was, a lot of IED
Right,
problems. Because
right, yeah.
what happened was the body armor was able to protect, the torso well, and there was Kevlar and advanced armor and armor plating. So they would soldiers would lose their arms and legs from the IED, because they were fighting in asymmetric warfare, and warfare's changed dramatically, and they were fighting asymmetric warfare, which was, heavily indoctrinated into us at the time. We knew we were fighting in asymmetric warfare. A lot of those ideas came from Vietnam, the Viet Cong, Apocalypse Now and uh, uh, you know Karate Kid 3 and that art and asymmetric warfare, Bright Shining Light, Neil Sheehan and his uh, experiences with the Viet Cong. So we were fighting this asymmetric warfare here against in Iraq and all these other places, and they were using IEDs a lot.
I'm
And
older than you, and I remember the first Gulf War. I had, I joined the military in the 80s, joining the Marines. So the first Gulf War, we went in, we got the job done, we got out. And they used to ask Bush Sr., why didn't you stay? And he was saying, well, you don't beat somebody up and live in their home. The second Gulf War, we seem to have forgotten that lesson. We hung around for a long, long time. And, we lost a lot of good people because nobody likes to be occupied, right? And these guys are creative. They're just as smart as anybody anywhere on the planet. We like to think that our enemies aren't as bright, but they can come up with very inventive ways to make something blow up and harm you. So I have no doubt you saw a lot over there.
right, and one of the great things about that experience was that the innovation is a necessity is the mother of invention. And ultrasound technology had just come out. That it was in its infantile stages, and you could see it getting better and better rapidly, just like our computer systems were getting better because it was mostly computers improving the ultrasound technology, right? Because X-ray was getting better, but ultrasound was now the new technology, and because it was portable and you didn't have to wear lead or a lot of things, the military just dumped a ton of money and ideas into it. And that was the state of pain care, right? Because if your arms or legs were blown off, and they had to do a lot of um, wound washing. The reason was Enceladobacter, they called it Iraqibacter, would infect those wounds, and so they would have to clean those out. And so what they would do is, there was a guy, Colonel Chester Buckenmeyer, was one of my mentors. We would take catheters, put them right by the nerves that would go to your arm or your leg, and
Right.
run continuous, local
Arcane or something.
local anesthetic, any Marcaine or would
Lidocaine, whatever.
mostly Marcaine, whatever. Marcaine was usually lidocaine. They were worried about nerve problems, but
So regional nerve blocks, you would do.
you do regional under ultrasound technology, and you'd learn how to identify structures using ultrasound, and then in real time place your catheter through a needle, tunnel it to where a nerve is, and then anesthetize that location.
I see.
Instead of doing general anesthesia over and over and over again on these people.
Right. That would be a greatly appreciated skill in that environment because,
Yes.
Untreated severe chronic pain can actually kill someone acutely. They knew this in the Civil War. We kind of forgot it because we had anesthesia and most things were done electively. But in combat, you can't, it's too busy. You've got too many hurt people. So a nerve block or some sort of a regional block can be an incredible blessing. And,
Yeah, they did advanced pain care because there were hundreds of soldiers coming back. Some of them fly from launch school, some of them fly directly from Iraq. And that was, I used to be like, what? They're flying here directly from Iraq? How does our planes even do that? You were in the Air Force, you know better. Because I didn't think there would be enough fuel for them to fly that.
Easy. You get in a C-141 or something like that. Those things can fly halfway around the earth. They are.
Right.
And you walk up next to one and you're thinking, there's no way this thing gets in the air. I remember the first time I saw one of the Marine choppers, a CH-57 Super Stallion, I believe it was, walking up to it and saying, we're dead. This thing is falling out of the sky. There's no way something this big. It's as big as my house when I was a kid.
Right.
Right up it goes. But so that's how you learned your interventional pain skills.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot there. I mean, I was at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York, before 9/11. I think it was before 9/11 happened. I was there and doing rotations there. But most of my pain management I learned in the military, and then I was in Miami. I did a cardiac anesthesia, and I would also they would make me. I almost had no weekends off there because I had to drill every weekend while I was there at Ryder Trauma Center, and they had a ton of military doctors there, and so I learned a lot there. They had burn units and whatnot, so I'd learn I'd have to drill there and learn not just the cardiac anesthesia and the cardiac ICU and the pediatric cardiac anesthesia, but the trauma. So, but yeah, I learned a lot at Walter Reed at that time because it'd make you work. During the wartime, I'd wake up 4 or 5 in the morning, do taps, and then go inside the hospital, and then they'd start.
Taps is when they raise the flag. You're
yeah,
and you do that, and then at the end of the day, they lower the flag, and you all stop what you're doing. So
right.
For the civilians that might be watching this, that's what taps is. It's not just for funerals.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a good experience. If you have a chance, make sure you go to. There's a museum behind there, a museum of medicine at Walter Reed Hospital.
Oh, I bet that's amazing. I know that
you can see the bullet that they fished out of Abraham Lincoln's head.
No way.
Blood on it.
No way. That is amazing. I know that in one of at the Edinburgh Medical School or somewhere in Edinburgh is the skeleton of a man named William Burke, because he was murdering people to sell as cadavers, burking, right? He would pull, and so for his punishment, after he was hanged, they stripped him down and displayed his skeleton for, they sent him to the same thing he was sending people to. His skeleton is still there. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So Walter Reed must have stuff going back 200 years for him. Well,
that's I said, you have Abraham Lincoln's bullet with the blood on a handkerchief. We can clone Lincoln if we wanted to.
Wow. Oh, wow. Hey, that's 160 years. 160 years.
That blew my mind. I mean, I've been to other medical museums. That was one of the coolest. I've been to Mutter Museum's probably the best in Philadelphia.
That's the one I've heard of, and that's the one I have dreamed of going to because I've heard so much about it. Some of the things they have that are just amazing.
Semmelweis Museum in Hungary. I've been to that one. That's amazing.
Semmelweis.
Yeah, Semmelweis.
Rest in peace. It's nice they named a museum after him after they threw him in the loony bin and beat him to death for believing in germs. It's the world is a strange place. I used to, I have a little bit of Native American blood, and I used to joke with some others of with the same heritage, and I would say, sure they wiped us all out, but at least they named helicopters after us now, right? There's always a consolation prize.
Right. Well, no, that was growing up back then. That's what I said. I loved Native American history.
Well, and people don't connect New York with Native Americans, but that was the Iroquois Nation. That was one of the largest confederacies of nations. Right. They had the Great Law of Peace, from which, according to Thomas Jefferson, some of the principles for the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, some of those were drawn from the Great Law of Peace. Women voted in the Iroquois Nation. And actually, inheritance was matrilineal, as it was in most ancient societies, Jewish society. It was matrilineal because you're always positive who your mom is. You're pretty sure who your dad was.
Right. A lot of civilizations that are matrilineal. And growing up there, that's what I said, New England. I loved American Indians, and they talk a lot about the witches because they did all the witch stuff in New England. So, and, I remember as a kid, they talk a lot about the witches and the witch trials and everything. That's a big part of the history there.
That blew me away because as a kid, I grew up in an area of the country where lynchings were common.
Right.
Lynching, a big mob gets you completely unjust, I understand. Then I'm learning about the Salem witch trials, and I'm like, wait a minute. They had trials and judges and lawyers.
Right.
They convicted people of witchcraft and strung them up.
And doctors, too.
A doctor wrote a book about it, about how to do it, how to go after the witches and tell when they're practicing their witchery.
Right.
It's like, oh, my gosh.
All at the same time of Newton and Lavoisier and enlightened people. I mean, kind of, I think, roughly around that time. And oh yeah, I was thinking as a kid, they used to say, yeah, if you were one of the tests for witchery was they throw you in a river.
Tie you up and throw you in a river.
Yeah, and if you floated, you were a witch because
they burned you.
Then they killed you, and then you were dead, and then we killed the witch. But if you drowned, you weren't a witch.
That's right. You were.
They proved it.
If you drowned, they're like, innocent.
And as a kid, I used to be like, these people are the most stupidest people in the world. Because even as a kid, I was like, how stupid can these people be? You died either way.
Oh, let me tell you a historical. You love historical trivia. That was the first use of bite mark evidence in what became the United States of America during the witch trials. A bite mark was seen to be evidence of the devil having chomped on someone. So bite mark evidence. Well, the accused was supposed to have, in a demonic fit, bit somebody, and they looked at the bite mark, they looked at his teeth and said, bite mark evidence. And he was hanged. He was hanged on the bite mark evidence. I'm like, we have not progressed that far in the last 300 some odd years because people still go away on bite mark evidence.
Well, yeah, Norman Clement does a whole good series, and I saw your video with him.
Yes.
And one thing we talk about often is dynamic versus static cultures, which was a Bernowski idea and a Kenneth Clark idea that, a dynamic culture that always changes its art, and that art includes scientific ideas as well as artistic ideas and freedoms of expression, will always outpace. I mean, obviously Sparta beat Athens, but all of Athens' ideas is what we revere today. I mean, Spartans, nobody even thinks about them, but
right. It was a mixture, both Athens and Sparta by themselves, they lacked a little something. When they came together, they had it all. It's kind of interesting that when you can no longer question the paradigm, when there is the party line that you must toe, that's when cultures become stagnant, and I think that's when cultures die. Because you can't progress if you can't accept that you might have been wrong about something. And that kind of leads us to, medicine. I would argue that the American government and insurance companies are trying to boil medicine down to a vending machine cookbook type of process where the patient themselves are not included in the process and not accepted as the incredibly variable, structure that they are, that patients are to be treated as if they were widgets, and this patient with this symptom must receive this medication or you have violated the law.
Right. And I think all that comes out to a change that happened in our lifetime. It happened when I was in medical school. And I remember the time when evidence-based medicine came out. And the whole idea it was that we're going to do reductionism. Whereas medicine used to be an art before, and viewed things as a Kantian whole. And we've talked about that. You and I have had conversations about how medicine before was an art. Things were viewed as a Kantian whole. There was Rudolf Virchow, who talked about cell and cellular theory, but also talked about the role of a physician in society and what a physician means and what a physician should do on a societal level as well as an individual level. And he was one of the great, besides I'd say Sigmund Freud, I'd say Rudolf Virchow was one of our great physicians. And I think we moved from evidence-based medicine and we pursued reductionism. And that has caused a ton of problems in our medical system because they have collected a bunch of data and they think they can analyze that data and look at that data and make predictions about things from that data.
So they're analyzing huge amounts of data and through I will call it reductive reasoning, they are insisting that the patient must conform to their data, to their analytical, to the output of their algorithms, rather than accepting that patients are extremely variable and need. The art of medicine is the patient doctor bond, and the understanding and acceptance of the patient as an individual, as a human being, and treating them with compassion. None of that comes into data analytics, right? So
Well, it's a reduction. It's trying to take something that's a whole. It's, and you're not looking at a Kantian whole. You're trying to look at things and reduce things, to simplify things, to understand it. And this is a big problem. We talked about Steve Jobs, and I have to go back to him because he, his story, where he invented basically the personal computer and viewed computing as an art form. Think Different was his ad campaign, but he said that, I brought a Pepsi guy who was a data analytics guy. He was kind of like the doctrine of Robert McNamara and that whole school of thought. Bernowski was also part of that too, of using data analytics to look at, for example, when planes came back,
right,
and you looked at the bullet holes, right? They would strengthen where the bullet holes were. But the data analyst said, "You're stupid for doing that. You don't need those parts of the plane for the planes that made back. It's the planes that
right
fell down. We got to strengthen the places that weren't hit."
That weren't hit, because the ones that were hit didn't make it back. Yeah,
Right.
it is a common fallacy of science to confuse correlation with causation. These two happened at the time, therefore that is the cause of this. And I can see why they would come back and say, "Oh, these wings took a lot of hits. We better reinforce the wings." They're saying, "Well, it's actually the cockpit that, there's no hits on this cockpit, and that's why it made it back, because it still had a pilot." So, yeah,
and that's why we made the A-10 Warthog, which is the best, right?
Yes.
You could miss it. It could be missing wings. It could be missing, and when they took it out, I was like, that was one of the best designed American planes of all time.
I heard they're going to give some to Ukraine, and I think that would make a huge difference. So the A-10 Warhawk has a titanium bathtub
Right.
around the pilot and the control systems. So you can blow off half a wing, you can lose an engine, that pilot's still alive and safe in there, and he's flying that thing back. Plus he's got his cool cannon, which if he fires it nonstop would actually probably stall the plane. So, that it's amazing, the Vulcan cannon.
Can I ask you some questions then? Because we were talking about our military days, military strategy, and how it's changed over time. And we talked about asymmetric warfare. Now we're in the fifth generation warfare. And asymmetric warfare, I believe, was the fourth generation warfare. But, when I was, in the Navy, we learned that, we live on a water world and we can control the world through trade and the choke points of trade. And if you control the choke points of trade, you control the world. And so we as a Navy must, and then you have to ensure trade, and, you profit from that. The nation profits from that. England did that well, but now you can see warfare has changed so much. Now it's drone warfare. And they're talking about putting AI in drones and having AI drone warfare. So, do you think that it's not going to be a military strategy is not going to move beyond now controlling the water world, controlling the choke points, but controlling the air, because it'll move from Navy now to your department,
Space. Yeah, I see something the size of a starship flying on a ballistic trajectory and throwing out these hockey puck looking, 50 to 100 ton reentry systems that re-enter, parachute, guided delivery, land right where your troops need them. And this thing never touches the ground. It stays in space, throwing these out like Starship Troopers dropping troops, and someday they will have troops on them. And it keeps going and then lands in a friendly country. So I see these systems we are moving toward a space-based war system. not just because we use satellites for all our modern communications and connectivity and all that, which would blind much of the United States, advantage if you took them all out, but because there will be space-based systems, and you will have to get permission to go to low Earth orbit or to leave low Earth orbit, and whoever is controlling that access will control the future. There's no doubt about it. There are
right.
resources out there that.
Well, I mean, I think drone warfare, especially small drone warfare, I think will really change. I mean, you've seen it from Ukraine, the nature of warfare and AI in there. If you put AI in there, I mean, you can see how dangerous it is. I mean, they're talking about sniper warfare. When I was, in school and learning military doctrine and, at Rhode Island, and we talk to people, the sniper was the best, right? One shot, one kill. And if you have a sniper, you can change warfare. The sniper changed warfare. But now I think AI drone, 200, 300 miles an hour can control, move around.
A few $100s, or maybe a few thousand. We're looking
Right.
at American rocket systems where they're 250 grand per missile, and we can take those things out of the air. Well, they're going to send these Shahed drones, which cost them all of maybe 15 grand. And you're
Right.
$1 billion rocket, you're going to run out of those because you can only buy so many before you're talking about some real money. And so you better start thinking small, intelligent. If you look at what the Ukrainians have done, they have created drone warfare. You have $90 million Russian tanks, not old Soviet tanks, but perfectly modern Russian tanks rolling in, supposed to be
Right.
competitive against the M1 Abrams and, the British tanks and the German tanks, German Leopards, and boom, a little drone that costs $300 blows that thing up. And you're saying,
Right.
holy son of a gun. It's the directed bullet, like the old Tom Cruise movie where they'd shoot at somebody and the bullet would go around corners.
Well, that's what scares me a little bit, going back to the AI thing, because, when we watched the Terminator movies, okay, there was one guy who's traveling, he was on the ground. Now and there's one Skynet. Now there's millions of AIs, right? And tons of countries making AI. So there's going to be 10 different Skynets, and the Terminator is going to come from the air, and you're not going to see it.
They will drop 10,000 robotic warriors over the enemy country.
Right.
And it will not
be that can find you.
Home. Those things will be solar powered. They're the perfect sniper. They can wait 8 days, and you look through the window to see if it's safe, and pop, they never took a nap. They never took a break. They didn't.
Right.
You're done.
I mean, that's what worries me, because also they have all our information, because they've hacked all our medical information. You see it every day, our banking information. So they know where you live. They know where you.
So we've got absolutely
you go to school. They know everything about your kids. It's.
Yep.
And I'm thinking to myself, nobody talks about this.
Nobody. Everybody
talks about military doctrine.
Okay. They're saying, well, the civilian companies are doing it. I'm like, yeah, but they're selling it to the government. That means the government has it. Things the government would never be allowed to do, they pay companies and agencies to do. So
Right.
You've got countries like China where you walk across the street outside a crosswalk and they send you a ticket in the mail.
Right.
And I'm like, whoa. So out of the 1.75 billion people in China, they knew it was you. They knew where you lived, and they mailed you your ticket, and they put your face on these little TVs out there so everybody can make fun of you and say, haha, he's a rule breaker, right? This is 1984 to a level that George Orwell could never have dreamed of.
Well, yeah, we have a bicycle for the human mind that's really,
Let's talk about that. That. You and I are both physicians. You and I have both run afoul of what I would call government-trained AI. So you've got the government wanting to crunch data, paying civilian companies to do things that they would never be allowed to do, and to maintain databases they would not be allowed to maintain, to collect information that they could not get without a search warrant, but they can pay the civilian companies to do it, and they're getting away with it. And then you have them deciding, contrary to what I believe 42 U.S.C. 1395 says, they are not just trying to influence the practice of medicine, they are trying to dictate it. They are deciding what is a good doctor and what is a bad doctor.
Correct.
And about 2017, from the research you've done, it's my understanding they put this together into, now it's not an AI system, but a multiple neural system.
2004 is the start of it from government documents.
So how did it? So what did they start doing? Now, originally, they're saying let's run some things through our computers and see if there's any extreme billing outliers. If someone has billed $100 million in 1 month, we should probably take a look at them, right? Everything starts reasonable before it goes to an insane degree. So it started in 2004. Tell me about the progression of where it started and where it is now.
All right. I mean, this is my understanding. I mean, I'm not a super expert in it, but I might be an expert in it because I've read so many documents. I read thousands and thousands of pages of documents. And I have like I said, I was pretty good in math, pretty good at physics. You know, my physics teacher at RPI wanted me to be the physics TA. And they were making nuclear bombs in there, learning how to make elements, Glenn Seaborg style. So, I looked through the data that the government provided me, and the moment I started going over it and looking at their technology, I don't want to say everything here, but because I still have a case going on, but looking at, they're targeting patients and they're targeting physicians, and they're using statistics and probability statistics to do.
So what are they trying to do? What is their goal?
Their goal is according publicly or privately from the documents.
What's their real goal from the documents? I mean, contrasted with what they say publicly, so we can see the juxtaposition. Oh. Now, publicly, they always say they're protecting the American people.
Right, they're protecting the American people.
From drug dealers in white coats and patients who are, just out to sell their drug, their medicine.
Right, dope sick. Privately, it looks like they aim to, they've conflated healthcare fraud, right? And drug dealing. And it's criminality, criminal mindset. We can identify criminality and criminal mindset using statistics, probability statistics, data analytics, predictive data analytics. And
when you say predictive data analytics, so this is a little bit like Minority Report, where they're going to calculate who is going to be bad, and we're going to go get them before they get a chance to be bad.
Pretty much, that's what the documents. Yeah. I mean, they're looking for outliers, and then they go and.
So they target you and then comb through your life to look for an.
Their data. Through the data, and then that's how they construct the case, and then what drives it is money, restitution, and they get a win.
Now, why did doctors suddenly become such a big target? Because in 1995, there was not a single physician criminal prosecution. Now there's been over 3,000? Recently. So why doctors? Why would the DEA or the FBI or the OIG?
From the documents, obviously you can control medicine, right? You can influence the control of medicine by either punishing someone or providing incentives to someone. So, that's where the data analytics comes in, and all these formulas and calculations. And I can tell you, I mean, they're using this to identify patients and doctors, and they're using this data analytics to do so. And when I first saw it, and I remember telling you, when I first understood the math and everything, what's going on, I felt like, Roy Batty in Blade Runner. Hunted like Roy Batty in Blade Runner. And
so he was the replicant that was the leader of the other replicants, and he was being hunted for the crime of existing.
For the crime, and
I think they had hijacked.
Right. But, so I remember feeling slave. I was like getting the documents, meeting my creator. That's what I remember. I told you I felt like that. That was the first thought that popped into my mind, like right away, was you're in the elevator meeting. I was his name? The creator, and seeing those documents. I mean, I don't want to get totally into them, but that's exactly what's going on. And
In general terms, what are the mistakes that they're making? What what do you see that went wrong? Because it looks to me, I've evaluated over 250, I think about 400 now, cases of physician prosecutions, and in 80% of them, I cannot find a crime. They had to lie to the doctor to get a prescription. They had to falsify MRIs. And then they use that. They'll scan 10,000 patient interactions, find one who overdosed on anything. A doctor right now in his 80s had to plead guilty. And I think he got 20 years or something, 70s or 80s, because they said you prescribed him oxycodone and this patient died of a heroin and cocaine overdose because there was a tiny bit of oxycodone still in his system. You contributed to his death. Therefore, not only are you guilty of prescribing to someone without a legitimate medical purpose, one of the two factors to prosecution, but you now contributed to his death, right? So the doctor didn't prescribe the heroin, he didn't prescribe the cocaine.
Well, the problem with that is we don't have all the data. Because I bet you if you looked at every physician, that would apply almost to every physician.
It would apply to every physician who treats pain or anxiety with a controlled medication, who's been doing it for more than, say, a year.
Right. It would apply to
doctor.
No, it would apply to every physician, because every physician will have a patient who's gotten one of those medicines before, a controlled substance, because there are thousands of them, right? The DEA every year, it's not like there are 10 controlled substances or 5 controlled substances. There's thousands of them.
Right. And substances that are controlled that you wouldn't think would be controlled. Tramadol is controlled in some states, not in others.
Right.
I think is now controlled.
Right. So we don't even know who's making these decisions. They don't give us any documents on how these decisions are made. So there's thousands of controlled substances, and they don't even have they're not giving me any of the documents from the Rouen case, even though I asked for them. They must exist, right? Because the Solicitor General explained it publicly in a forum, right? Public forum. Because we have Roman systems, right? Our founding fathers essentially created a republic, a Roman type republic, right, in our country.
Right.
And then we have a Bill of Rights based on John Locke and Jefferson, whatever, right? And natural law that protects us. But
facing your accuser is one of the most fundamental aspects of a just society, or a society striving for justice. And when your accuser is an AI. Oh, did I hit a button?
Yeah.
When your accuser is an AI, did you get to face your accuser? Are they allowing you to face your accuser?
Well, I'm trying to get the documents. I mean, I'd face my accuser at trial, obviously, if they're willing to have a trial discussing all this AI that they've been using. If they're willing to bring it all out, we know, and there's multiple people who've made AI. There's Hularent, there's NarxCare, there's Apris or Bamboo Health. There's and they're involved in the PDMP. There's National Association of NABP. Timothy King has his own patent. He's a physician, right? He says he has an AI system. Blue Cross Blue Shield has their own AI system. So there's all these AIs. Like I said, there's all these AIs all around the country. And there's all these AIs in banks. There's all these AIs in healthcare.
Now, the results of these AIs are being used to diagnose disease, because they are diagnosing a risk of addiction, a risk of overdose. They are diagnosing addiction itself. They are using it for diagnostic principles, and they are using it, I would argue, for treatment, because they're insisting that doctors conform to the opinions of these AIs in their treatment, or you get locked up. There's no greater enforcement than that. But these systems, were they vetted through the FDA system as a level 2, 3, or 4?
They never got vetted from what I've seen. And they're saying they can predict criminal mindset,
Wow.
right? They're saying that they can predict criminality, right? Because they're doing criminal charges, right? And a criminal mindset means I mean, I don't know, there's many ways of looking at that.
Well, fundamentally, mens rea.
Philosophically,
You knew the law and intended to break it.
right. You knew the law and you intended to break it. And they're doing this to thousands of doctors, especially a lot of pain and addiction doctors, because there's controlled substances and involved, right? And so that's what's essentially going on, is exactly what you're saying, is they're looking for outliers, but they never provide the whole data set. And a computer takes input, processes it, right, through algorithms or equations, or for people who've made computer programs, that's how it works, and then it generates an output. But some people don't understand that you can take that output and understand the processing, and if you have the input and know everything. And that's what I'm saying is, when I started showing some of the documents of these FOIA documents to various people, Dr. Cheek, Doctors of Courage, Dr. Zena Crenshaw Logel was in the United Nations. She was at the Human Rights Council. She was the chair of the Human Rights Council. And Belinda Parker Brown, Louisiana United International, certain human rights, I'd share the work with them and discuss it with them. They were horrified. I mean, Zena Logel almost fainted when I showed her the evidence of the government, because it shows racial targeting and targeting of, because they're outliers all in society. And, when the DO-MAG, IBM had those systems in Nazi Germany, I took a World War II class in RPI, and that's World War II script in a computer college or a technological.
Right. IBM made the machines, right? IBM made the machines.
Yeah, IBM made the machines
used by Germany to track people.
Right. And to target, exactly. And wherever those machines were, and they were able to run the census data and whatever, they were able to kill like 90% of the Jewish people or the gypsies, or they can target and identify fast.
Okay, so let's look at that for a minute. So I had done a little studying, and I saw that one of the criteria they use is, do you associate with somebody with a felony conviction, right? Now,
right.
1/3 of all African American males in the United States of America, adults, have a felony conviction. 1/3.
Right.
Right. Now, studies clearly show that's not because they are more criminal. It's because they're suspected more, searched more, prosecuted more, convicted more, and imprisoned more. So, if
you know this, you looked at the insides of people.
Oh, absolutely. Right? Absolutely. So if you have a black doctor and he's got more than 3 black male friends or relatives, he's going to associate with a known felon on average.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Just by the fact of being black in America and being subject to the racial disparity that occurs in our justice system. Now, I also
it's a caste system. It's a caste system. It's a caste system, and everything's recorded. There's algorithms that go. That's what I'm saying. When I showed this, we filed actually United Nation complaints to United Nations. Doctors of Courage filed it. America United International filed it. I filed it with Belinda Parker Brown. I mean, we call her the Rosa Parks of medicine, because of she's a force of nature and free will, and so is Dr. Cheek. And
I would argue that the algorithm does not know about implicit bias, and that if you feed a neural net racial information, it will make decisions that are racially based. And it will not just be biased, it will be perfectly biased. If it associates a minority, I have noticed in these prosecutions a huge number of Arabic sounding names, a huge number of Jewish names, and a huge number of black doctors, Hispanic too. Now, there are white doctors that get rolled up in it, but the disparity is pretty huge compared to their population in the medical field. Because we can't forget, that the American Medical Association was established to keep black people and women out of medicine.
Correct.
That's in their history. They can't, they can't deny.
I mean, they moved beyond that. I mean, we have, Jesse Ehrenfeld was gay. And, so I feel like, and when I've attended some of their events, and they seem to have moved on way beyond that. And, they have their issues.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the AMA has moved beyond that now. But what I'm saying is that there aren't that many. Now, there are many more female doctors than there used to be, but there aren't that many minority physicians in the United States compared to their populations in the general population. So when when you look at the American prison system and you say, okay, 40% of the people in prison are black, they make up about 18% of the American population. Something's going on here, right?
Right. I mean, yeah, it doesn't make sense that, according to the computer program, then if you're predicting, then the black people or people of color would be they have twice as much criminal mindset, according to
it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
Because we have locked more of you up, we therefore define you as criminal. Because we locked more of you up, we will therefore lock more of you up, therefore proving you're criminal. There was an article that came out where a doctor said, well, I don't think medical boards are being tough enough because a lot of these physicians that are going to prison were previously cleared by their medical board. I'm saying you could flip that around and say, I think the government is wrongfully prosecuting innocent doctors because a group of physicians looked at their practice and said, no, this is okay. And it was the government without a group of physicians who came in and said, no, we're going to lock him up even though the medical.
Well, they have operations, they've Operation Pill Mill Nation 1, Operation Juice Doctor. They have all these operations. And
Operation
they don't have operations against pizza people who make pizzas or bakers or attorneys or right.
You can target anyone. You could target anyone. If you said if you told the Justice Department, we are now after attorneys, scan the life of every attorney and find a reason to prosecute them with a federal crime, I think 40% of them would go to prison. Not because they're criminal, but because you can find federal laws are so vague, especially regarding the practice of medicine, that you can find an excuse to prosecute and convict almost anyone. And doctors, because they prescribe control, all you need is one bad outcome. One patient who died in their sleep, one patient who overdosed on something, and they might have decided to take themselves out of the equation.
But they're not looking at surgeries. They're not looking at surgeons. They're not looking at any.
But that wasn't their mandate. Their mandate was to stop all diversion, and the only way to do that.
They thought they'll stop the opiate crisis.
I truly think they thought they could distract from their failure to stop the fentanyl from coming across the border. When the CDC played right into their hands by saying all fentanyl deaths are prescription medicine deaths, those are prescription opioid deaths. I think that gave the government an opportunity to say, now we don't have to go after the Sinaloa cartel. We can just go after doctors. We can lock people up. We can take their assets. We can get these convictions. We can say we're doing a good job. And the death rate just skyrockets. So from 2000 to 2012, the rate of opiate prescribing slightly increased and the rate of overdose deaths increased in parallel.
Right.
In 2010 to 2012, prescribing leveled, deaths leveled. Then they started dropping after 2012. 2016.
The government's interventions.
Yes. As a percentage of the population. Our population is growing. You got to do something.
But it's growing older too, so they require more diseases.
That's right. That's right.
So yes.
Prescriptions started dropping from 2012 to 2016 with no intervention, no doors kicked down, no machine guns pointed in patient faces, none of that. It starts dropping on its own. But apparently that's not good enough, because then we get this sudden purge of physicians treating pain and addiction, and immediately the death rate starts to skyrocket because you've got all these patients being thrown on the street with legitimate pain, with real pain, whether they have severe chronic pain or addiction, they've got a real disease. And they are out there looking for treatment or relief, and they're encountering these fake oxycodone and hydrocodones laced with fentanyl and xylazine, and they're dying.
Right.
They're dying by the hundreds of thousands.
They took out. It was just like it's like a Chernobyl to me. What they did, on Chernobyl, they took out the control rods. It took out everything.
They had three safety systems. They disabled two and tested the third. I'm like, I don't think that's smart.
Okay, so but here what they did was they took out all the doctors who were treating, but the medication itself, the FDA, if it's FDA approved, its benefits outweigh the risks, and we know about therapeutic index and pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics and things to a very high level, right? You can even take it to compartment models like we do in anesthesia and blood-brain barrier, and when we do our calculations, you can also calculate decay, right? Alpha, beta decay, and all the different types of decay of a drug as it's eliminated through your body.
Right.
But, the government itself, it has an infantile way of looking at things. From the documents I've read, I don't think they know what correlation, causation, or anything like that, because I don't see any of the science in it. And I've asked them for the science papers, and I'm suing them for everything, because I said, just give it to me. They've acknowledged it existed. They've even acknowledged that there's 174 documents. Okay, well then give it to us. Maybe we can save millions of lives, right? Because obviously what you've done is not working, but made things worse. So why not give everything? I would
argue, because then you could then prove that it was their fault that things got worse. If there's one thing the government's masterful at, it's hiding its responsibility.
Well, unfortunately, we have a lot of I don't think they understood the problems of complexity, stochastic systems, the problems of biosphere 2, ecological systems. I know we've talked about Price's mathematics, Hardy-Weinberg mathematics.
You're talking about chaotic systems that are fundamentally unpredictable.
Right. Exactly. And it's led to a whole bunch of problems. We thought Black equation and economics would work.
In lay terms, they want a cookbook. A patient of this age and with this disease should have this much pain and should therefore get this much medicine. They want things to be simple, and medicine is not.
Well, that's what the whole point of evidence-based medicine was. I mean, and I think that's what I said, instead of you trying a different idea, why try a different idea when this idea is better? Okay, well then how are things going to advance? Okay, there'll be some ivory tower person that will figure out a new system, and that's why I think medicine has become very static. When I went to Thomas Jefferson University Hospital, that's where they had the first heart-lung machine. And you talked about people with a God complex. I mean, we were able to take people, stop their heart, cool them down, so the surgeon can operate on the aorta or ruptured aorta. We brought them to brain death for an hour, circ arrest. I mean, I did circ arrest cases where no blood flow throughout the whole body for a good hour.
Technically dead,
and then bring them back to life. And I've even done left heart bypass. So I've done extremely complex surgical cases. But I've seen that the pace of surgical innovation is slowed. I saw it in my own lifetime, and I think a lot of it has to do with evidence-based medicine. I'm not saying it's totally bad, but it takes the art out of it because it's a reductionist.
And you can take anything to an extreme. I would argue that we're having to offshore our innovation, because other places, I know there was a cardiac surgery where someone has a dilated cardiomyopathy, and for a long time doctors were saying, why don't we just cut a wedge out of the left ventricle and sew it back together?
Batista did that. Batista.
They wouldn't let you do it. They said no. But then in South America, they're like, the guy's gonna die, and they cut.
Right.
Works great.
Exactly.
You wouldn't have been able to do it here.
No, exactly. And I think, you know, if you study the history of medicine, and I have, and I've studied some of the great physicians, not just from a social aspect. I mean, Che Guevara was a physician, you know, um, uh, and like I said, Rudolf Virchow was a physician, and you have, um, Vesalius and some of the great physicians, like we talked about Semmelweis. And um, to me, physicians used to go to England and Europe and take those ideas and come here. And we had, people used to do lobotomies. I mean, things that were considered outlandish ideas. And nowadays, they probably put the doctor in prison, or he'd lose.
Yeah, absolutely. I would argue that when the federal government claims that it has the right to police the quote usual practice of medicine, they have expanded that to mean the average practice of medicine, which means you can never innovate. The first surgeon to bring a new technique back from Germany and to implement it here is not practicing the usual practice of medicine. Therefore, off to the prison you go.
Correct. And I think that
ketamine for chronic pain. There's all kinds of screaming now to throw doctors using ketamine in prison because Matthew Perry took like 40 things and then took a nap in his hot tub. Now, I liked Matthew Perry, and I'm sorry he's gone. I know he was fighting a terrible demon. But he had had ketamine therapy weeks before he died. What he took was not given by his doctor. But there are people screaming. I saw it on a television show saying, lock those doctors up. And I saw a doctor, so some physicians had come out in support of another physician who had been targeted. And the news announcer said, well, somebody needs to investigate those doctors supporting him. And I'm like, well, there we go. Now why in the world did we ever wear a uniform to fight the Soviet Union if we were going to adopt their tactics?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I said it's a very strange time in medicine to see this. Um, you know, that I used to travel, or like I said, I travel around the world a lot. Went to India. In India, they think cyclically, they have a cyclical kind of culture. Things move in cycles.
Right.
We're a little bit more linear in our thinking. They're more cyclical. And, there's cycles. And it seems like I believe it all comes down to this idea that it's a top-down control versus a bottom-up way of finding things. So someone at top knows exactly what's wrong with the system. They know how to fix the system. And only if they fix the system will the system work. And so there's a big battle of ideas, and you can see it's happening right now. I mean, sometimes I look at, is it about World War III about to happen? Is there a huge civil war in America? Because, it's an unusual time. It wasn't, I've never kind of.
Well, it reminds me of the 1930s. We're in the 1920s. And I mean, the 2020s, and it reminds me of the 1920s. We had the American Nazi Party. We had, the American Socialist Party. We had all these things very different from how things ended up going, but they came this close to going a different direction. We came very close to being a mirror of the Soviet Union or a mirror of the Nazi regime. Lindbergh loved the Nazis. Now,
right.
How can medicine get back on track? How can we kind of regain our control of the practice of medicine as physicians, and how can patients help do this when
I think we have to look at
an entity with almost infinite power? Well, infinite access to taxpayer dollars, let's say that.
Well, one thing, I don't think people understand medicine as an art and a science. That's like saying, to them, they used to put pornographers in prison, and Larry Flynn changed all that. Now, so, and they knew it when they saw it, right? I know pornography when I see it.
Yeah, one of the Supreme Court justices said that. It's very hard to practice medicine in a manner that matches the federal interpretation of the standard of care when that standard changes according to every prosecution. In one case, they told the doctor, that they told the jury, this doctor prescribed Narcan to this man, therefore he knew he was a high risk of overdose, proving the doctor took that risk and he should not have prescribed that medication, that narcotic, and so he's a bad doctor. Off to prison he goes. There's another case where they said, this doctor did not prescribe Narcan to this patient despite the medication he was on, proving the doctor did not care if he died of an overdose. So no matter what you do, they can twist it
Right.
to a medically naive jury into what becomes a criminal offense. And contrary to Ruan. Ruan said you have to have criminal intent. They're ignoring that.
That's what they've done. That's what the whole idea of criminal mindset and punishment, and what the whole purpose of government force is, right? Is to control the population and to what you believe. But there has to be some transparency, which is what I've argued in filing the Freedom of Information. So, and give me everything, but everything is hidden, everything is secret, everything. And it's been going on for, the drug war has been going on for 50 years, and I'm asking stuff from the Drug Enforcement Agency, and they're not giving it to me. And I'm thinking to myself, why aren't they giving me documents? I mean, average regular scientific documents. And I think that they're hiding a lot of things.
It took me 15 years, actually. Let me do the math exactly. Got it in 2019, asked for it in 1998. So that would be 21 years. It took me 21 years to get access to records that they immediately knew they had on hand, and they knew, should have known, or were willfully blind to the fact that they should have released it. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request in 1998. They identified the records, asked headquarters, should we turn it over? Headquarters said no. And it took me 21 years to get those records. Now, what kind of justice can you expect if it takes you 21 years to get something from the government? Now, things might be a little better now with the newer Freedom of Information Act laws, who knows? But what, besides, Linda Cheek and Dr. Clement and these others who are fighting, what would help you in your fight? Is there anything anyone can do? Where do you think things are going? What's some last thoughts? Some things so that patients and doctors know where they can help.
Well, one thing is I can see the pendulum has shifted from one direction to the other, and it's causing increasing damage. And so one thing I'd like is, I think we need to get all the documents.
Okay.
I think that's the most important thing, is for the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Healthcare Fraud Task Force, which has all these computer systems, and to release their computer programs, release their manuals for these computer programs.
Okay.
Because if they're being used in a criminal system, there's no reason to keep it secret.
Well, it's illegal to keep it secret, isn't
Right.
it? Isn't there a law that says that if you're going to use it in federal court, it's got to be proven, vetted, double-checked, and made available to the defense?
Right. But they haven't produced it in 2004 because there's very little legal literature. So one thing is, and you see, I think the fact that the legal profession, right? And if you look at the legal profession, it came out of Hammurabi, right?
Right.
Or I mean, there's older laws, and it came from Egypt, and there was proto laws and what rules and how the laws came about, and how nation states came about from like tribe, and how looking at things from a 50,000-foot view. So transparency is important. One, because with transparency, if we're having a problem, if a lot of people are dying, the solution to the problem might not be punishment for numerous numbers of people, because it's not seeming to work and it makes things worse. And if you look at the inner cities, like I was working in predominantly the inner cities, and there's people with me, Dr. Walter Wren, he got arrested Dr. Clarence Verdell, he got arrested, and a lot of doctors, Summers. I mean, they were arresting doctors all the time. Even in my own hospital, before I got arrested, there was a doctor, Dr. Beto, got arrested. Then they arrest me for almost the same things that Dr. Beto was tried for. So and almost identical. So that means any of the things that I did, any compliance plans or whatever, it seemed like it didn't matter to the government. So it's things have to change, because what makes the doctor criminal? That's what I'm asking.
Right.
And the government is not giving much information.
I see.
And so, and then you have to ask, what's the purpose for all this? And so I'm asking for that. But what's wrong with giving computer programs? You have to understand. You'll understand the mindset of the computer programmer or the mathematician who created these computer programs. And if the computer programs are trying to limit risk or reduce risk, right?
I would argue that they just wanted a metric, and they didn't care so much if the metric was accurate or not. And that they know that the metric that they're using is not accurate, and they don't want to admit that because it's been so effective. They've made hundreds of millions of dollars taking elderly physicians' retirement accounts away.
Right.
So that would be my argument. Well, let's see. Do you have a parting thought? We're 5 minutes from 2 hours, and I want to know, where can they go to contact you? Where can they go to find an organization that might be able to help?
Well, I would say, first of all, try to join one of the organizations that are fighting this problem right now. Doctors of Courage is doing that. Doctor Patient Forum, American Pain and Disability Foundation. There's America United International, Louisiana United International, that's looking at this. And then there's various physicians that are very prominent in the community. Dr. Mark Gibson, I think, is excellent. He's been fighting this issue for quite a long time. There's Professor Libby. And then there's also some medical journals. You have Pain News Network.
Right.
You have You're Within the Norms.
Norman Clement.
Norman Clement's operation. So you have a variety of news sources. And then there's also private chat groups on Facebook that a person can find to connect with the community and to identify the problems and share solutions to the problems, possible solutions to the problems. I think people also should consider complaining to the United Nations. I know I filed a complaint, and by complaining, to a body that deals with human rights issues or civil rights issues that are being ignored by our government. Right.
That's a good point. Where can they go to find resources on how to do these things?
Okay. The United Nations Human Rights Council.
Okay.
They can contact there, as well as like I said, some of the groups, America United International, Louisiana United International, Doctors of Courage.
I will try to put together a list and link it, actually, and I will ask you for your input, and I'll link it in the description when I post this.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you laying these things out and discussing these things and just telling us a little bit about your journey and who you are, how you came to this understanding of what you're dealing with. Because I guess one of the things I find shocking is the quality of human being that the federal government believes it needs to protect society from. Doctors like Dr. Bothra, who helped Mother Teresa build hospitals, Dr. Rafai, who established telemedicine and set up psychiatry to help patients, Dr. Reach, who was treating addiction, yourself. I put you in that category. You're a patriotic American that joined the military to help defend your country when it was under attack, and now your country's attacking you. And I think it's necessary for others to come to your defense, and I hope we can help organize that.
I appreciate that so much, Dr. Parker. And things are looking up, because as one final thought, as you said, you and I are are trying to figure out how to bring some stability to some of these artificial intelligence systems. So, you and I have discussed some equations and thoughts that might, at least in the healthcare setting, stabilize artificial intelligence systems.
Right, like Lyapunov functions and such.
Biochemical functions, and so hopefully we can get those articles and those ideas published, and I can either work on them with people, or it stimulates ideas and thoughts to move in the direction to provide stability and homeostasis. Because you and I, a lot of what we try to do as physicians was try to achieve either homeostasis, or if that was not good for the patient, you want to try something different, new, unique,
Right.
alternative.
If nothing's working, you have to try something
Right.
new. And that's one of the things I fault the government for. I don't fault them for confusing correlation with causation in the early days of the opioid epidemic, when it was clear that their intervention was having a negative effect and their interventions were causing this huge spike in deaths. I absolutely fault them for doubling down, and I hold them responsible for that. So we'll leave it at that. Dr. Anand, thank you so much. I'll put a lot of links in the description so they know how to reach out.
Thank you so much.
I
love this show, and I hope you can continue to do so in the future. But you're always going to hold a special place in my heart, and some of the conversations that we've had, as well as some of the work that we've worked on. I'm truly appreciative.
Thank you so much, sir. You have a beautiful day.
You too.